if I may ask this, for example, if somebody does sama' of Al-Wasiyah of Imam Ibn Qudamah, so is there a difference between doing sama' to transmit a chain, but doing sama' just for the barakah? Because someone doing for barakah, he might not necessarily have the correct naql.
This is correct. Doing so for barakah is not a problem. Doing so for barakah is not a problem. If someone's reading through the kitab, but they're doing so correctly, but they might have some mistakes in their reading, that's not an issue. But if they were citing the text to establish a point,
right,
but improperly citing, like it's not what was intended, like you used like the end part on Salat al-Hajj to prove the shirk, that is shirk to do shafa'ah with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's like, no, that's not what Muwaffaq ibn Qudamah, that's not what he intended. Or you try to establish from the Lum'ah that, yeah, Muwaffaq ibn Qudamah, he never did tafweed. It's like, no, that's bad naql. We can't take from you because that's not what the author intended. Yeah, Muwaffaq ibn Qudamah, he intended by saying, what he meant by that is that we know the meanings of the names and attributes. No, that's not what he intended. That's not what he intended. So now we can't take from you. You know, you might be in the middle of a dars and someone is like talking. It's like you hear something like that, you just get up and leave because you're not getting anything of it. It's like you're eating bread without any yeast. What do you have then? Crackers. If you came to eat bread, that's different. You have to leave. But if you just came to say, listen, I'll eat anything that's been baked, crackers or bread, fine. But if you came to have bread and he gives you crackers, you leave.
Right.
I didn't come to have crackers, right? That's what's happening though, right? But reading a kitab for barakah, that's not an issue. For a sama' barakah where people are getting reward from it, that's not an issue because you're not establishing a hukum from it or establishing a ruling from it or establishing things like that from it. So those things are they're afa anhu, they're pardonable. But the moment you start saying, oh yeah, you have to transmit it accurately.
If I'm correct, does it eventually come down to, so before somebody even memorizes or transmits the particular book, his fahm is not correct? Is that where it begins with?
Yes. It starts with that, where people's understanding starts off being incorrect. And then what happens is they start adding things to it that the author didn't intend, or that the transmitter didn't intend, or that the speaker didn't intend. So if it's in the case of the Quran, that Allah did not intend, or that the mufassirin that look at the text didn't intend, or hadith that the transmitter didn't intend, right? So what happens is those things then get passed down the line that hadith is in reference to that. Like I'll give you an example. Surah Al-Jinn, the end, don't call on anyone in the masajid of Allah. That ayah has been used to say, yeah, that's the proof that making tawaf around the graves is major shirk. What tawaf isn't even mentioned in this ayah.
Right.
This ayah is not even anything to do with that topic. It's talking about not calling on anyone in the masjids of Allah. Making tawaf around the grave isn't the masjid.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Indeed.
And the actual asbabun nuzul, the reason for revelation of that ayah was because of the idols at the Kaaba and everything else. That's nothing to do with any of that. So that improper citation of that ayah, that alone disqualifies that person.
Right.
He's disqualified. I wouldn't listen to any. That's why I never listen to like reciters from Ahlul Bid'ah or whatever else. No. People say that their voices might be beautiful. They might sound angelic. I don't know. I wouldn't know because I don't listen to them. Because just the fact of their improperly, not just the bad theology, this major kuffar and major shirk, not just that. It's other things as well.
Exactly.
It's other things as well.
And this is following the principle of the Tabi' Ibn Sirin.
That's it. That's what we see when he did the exposition of the Sunnah, which is another example. Right. Exposition of the Sunnah in English wasn't properly transmitted.
No, that was wrong.
That's what was crazy about it, because some brothers were sent me emails were actually resistant to me doing the sama of that kitab over Ramadan. Yeah, because they're like, oh, that's a book of the V. What are you talking about? When we look at Imam Al-Barbahari died 329 Hijri. That cult wasn't here, that it hadn't gone through its tajdeed yet. In fact, the Abbasids in that time had almost wiped out all of the Khawarij. There were only like 7 left that were living in Tunis at that time. So, and that's going to be the last book the Khawarij want anything to do with.
Right.
So why would you be resistant to me citing that kitab? Well, so-and-so, they use it. Okay, well, Shiites quote the Sahih of Imam Muslim. We're going to stop using that?
Yeah.
That's nonsense.
Exactly.
It's not been done with proper naql. So we have to transmit it properly then. So that we can. And it's been cited by Ibn Battah and Ibn Rajab and Muhammad al-Farra. It's been cited by so many different people.
Right. Yes.
Although it's got different riwayat and variations, but it's been cited to where for sure we can translate it. Because it was given to us. It was, we read it when we were, it's like, it's not a dispute. There's no dispute about its authorship, which in the book itself at the end, I cite 10 historical references citing that it's definitely from Imam Barbahari. And then his theology, I cite 11 or 13 historical sources regarding the soundness of his theology and who he is.
Yes.
That stuff is not in dispute. The issue is this text was not transmitted properly because the people that had brought it to you were citing it to you in other than the way that the author intended. And based upon that, that disqualifies you from taking from them. Even if you put to the side the major shirk and major kufr and the i'tiqad, if you put to the side that, that issue of naql disqualifies you from being able to take that from.
Wow.
Even if the book's intact, it might be intact, but you still can't. Because the issue of naql, because they're transmitting it according to other than what was intended by the speaker.
Wow. And can naql, this wrong application of naql, also be done with fatawa? What do we find with the Qada of Salaf ibn Taymiyyah?
Yes. Yes. It's a frequent problem. Or even what you asked me about al-Mawsu'at al-Fiqhiyah from Kuwait.
Right.
There's people that improperly cite it.
Right.
Because when you cite that, that's sometimes those fatawa are the equivalent of raw sugar.
Wow.
It's raw data. So you have to understand the background of that ruling, and the context of those rulings are mentioned. But there's people who will cite that without its context, but the context is mentioned because that's a big set. Usually it's on a CD-ROM. It's a big set. And in written form, it's like 20, 30 volumes or something. But people will just cite it like, yeah, this is okay. Wait a minute, hold on. That's not what they intended by that. That's not what they intended. Sometimes, like even like Abdullah, Imam Abdul Ghani Al-Lubadi rahimahullah, who wrote the Hashya on the Dalil. When he's discussing in his Hashya an understanding of the Dalil, there's sometimes discussions on what's understood by certain things that Imam al-Karmi said when he wrote his text. Well, the only way to get a firmer understanding is to do what? To go to the Sharh of al-Karmi, because Dalil al-Talib is actually the mukhtasar of Ghayat al-Muntaha. So to get the context, you go to Ghayat al-Muntaha and al-Muntaha itself to get the context. So then sometimes there'll be a difference, there'll be an ikhtilaf in the school on a matter, and it might come down to something that's in the Muntaha or something that's in the Dalil. And there's a statement that's in there, and Imam al-Lubadi said, this other opinion is not as strong because it doesn't look applicable according to what was intended by al-Karmi on this topic. It's not as according to what's intended.
Wow.
وعن النقل, and from the naql. So based upon what was intended, the second position, he said, seems to be the better one.
Wow.
So it is important for fatawa and other things to cite things in their context according to what was intended, because this has even happened with regard to rulings, with regards to transactions, with regards to other things. There's lots of things where that's why that big post about Taqi ibn Taymiyyah rahimahulloh's statement on Salah, the abandonment of Salah, that had to be resolved because it was improperly cited.
Very much needed.
It was improperly cited. And there's people still today, when they're taking that ruling on 3 talaq in one sitting being one, that they don't, it's like when you ask them, why do you think that? Well, because it can't be. Why? What was the reasoning behind why Taqi ibn Taymiyyah said that? Because it comes back to the discussion about pronouncing talaq upon a woman in a monthly cycle, and whether that is that talaq being sahih and it comes to pass or not, whether it's yaqa or la yaqa, right? And that's where that discussion's built around. But to understand that, you have to know. And then sometimes there's scholars that will say, they'll cite an opinion, or they'll cite Taqi, and it shows the respect that the scholars have for him, but they'll go against what he's doing because it's contrary to what's been handed down. So Taqi ibn Taymiyyah made a statement on the talaq, 3 talaq in one sitting. And that quote, because I know where it's from in Majmu' al-Fatawa. And Imam Abdul Baqi al-Muwahibi, he said, it's been said by one of the scholars. Look at the respect that he shows. It's been said by one of the scholars, this. He says, but the sahih is this.
Wow, okay.
And the reason for this is this and this and this. The other statement, although, what did he say? The other statement, although used in effort and striving, did not reach the standpoint of the Naql. It did not reach the standpoint of the Naql. Right? But you see, not only that he said, okay, listen, you can't use this, but look at the respect that he accorded him with as well. And he cited him in context. But the people that will make citations of Taqi ibn Taymiyyah, if you cite him, you have to use the right context so that you're properly representing what he said. Because in his lifetime, that was actually one of his major complaints, that people improperly cite him. Because when he came to Egypt, he had to resolve a whole bunch of things, because people had by the time he'd reached Egypt, people had thought that he'd said a whole bunch of other things other than what he said.
And is this because they weren't following his curriculum?
No, they because he gets to Egypt, people in Egypt had only heard about the things that he said, because he's transported there. They didn't know him. They'd known his name, but they didn't know of him personally. And then it's particularly dishonest because a certain sheikh in Damascus, who had actually sat and learned usul al-fiqh and hadith from Ibn Qayyim, wrongly spreads these rumors to Egypt. Right? He wrongly spreads these rumors to Egypt. So how could you take usul al-fiqh and hadith from them, but then turn and call them mujassim? You know how duplicitous that is? But that's for another time. But that's the type of stuff that happens. Is proper naql is like, that stuff is important. And even when you cite, listen, never mind that, even like dealing with a kuffar, like sometimes people will be making a point or something, and they'll be talking about Christianity. And I'm like, that's wrong. That's not what Christians believe, or that's not what's in the Bible. That verse in the Bible doesn't even mean that.
So now you're talking about mistransmitting their text.
Yes, because if you're looking to try to guide someone, and they know that you're intentionally misapplying what they said. So naql just doesn't count for our ulum. It also accounts for basic honesty. When you cite something and say, yes, this is in the Bible, are you sure that that's the context of what's meant? People improperly apply things.
Yeah.
And then what happens is those people go, if they look it up and find you're dishonest,
Yes.
it takes something away from the rest of what you were saying.
Exactly.
Or if they know for a fact, it takes something away from what you're saying. So, especially in a situation like that, when you're talking about a book that you haven't read and a religion that you don't know, it's enough to stick with the ayat of the Quran and say, listen,
Yes.
the Trinity is major shirk, and salvation is only by Allah. It's not through anyone else. You don't get into start talking. That's why Imam al-Zahabi and others said, people should not be studying their books and other things unless they have the requisite knowledge and the effort to do so. Not because everybody's stupid and they don't know anything, but the time it takes to sit down and study that. You first of all have to have your obligations in order. Do you know the right creed and what you're supposed to know so that you don't get messed up? Okay, you do? Okay, now, do you understand when they're writing their book or with their book that they have, when you're dealing with a Catholic? If you're going to be talking to a Catholic, you have to use the Douay-Rheims Bible. You can't use the King James. That has 66 books. The Douay-Rheims has 81.
Wow.
You have to know that going into a discussion with a Catholic.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's part of understanding the person you're talking to. If I speak to a Coptic Christian, I'm not going to cite the King James Bible because it's not authoritative to them. I have to use I have to use the Coptic Bible. The oldest, because the oldest translation of the Bible in Arabic was done 2 years after Rasulullah was by Bishr al-Sidri. So I got to use that because that's what they recognize. And likewise, if I'm speaking to Protestant Christians, I'm probably going to use the King James or maybe the NIV or maybe the NES or no, the ESV, English Standard Version. I might use those. Now, let me talk to them. If I'm in England, most certainly I'm going to use the King James Bible because that's authoritative. I'm not going to use the Douay-Rheims. They reject Catholicism. If they reject the Catholic Church, why would I use the Catholic Bible? And I'm not going to use the Jehovah's Witness translation if I'm speaking to Protestants, because the Protestants believe the Jehovah's Witnesses are Christian. So it's the ability to deal with people and to talk to them and understand when you're discussing affairs with them. It's that ability to understand it, because there's lots of things that I don't agree with, but I can transmit it accurately. I can accurately give you a layout of Nazism, but I don't believe in it.
Right, exactly.
I can accurately transmit what's in that filthy document written on hemp, the US Constitution. I can tell you what's in that trash, but I don't believe it. But I'm honest enough where I can tell you what its contents are, because part of that is the ability to impart. In the case of the Shar, it's the ability to impart knowledge accurately. And outside of that, it's the ability to impart earthly knowledge in a trustworthy fashion. Both of those things establish you as being trustworthy. And the ability to do that also means you're transmitting it with the understanding that was intended by the person that wrote or said that. So when you're in discussion with the people who might be adherents of that position, that you're able to avoid a lot of false equivalencies and arguments and actually discuss the issues at hand. I know very well what the Ash'aris or the Maturid, I know their position and understandings. So I don't get in arguments with them. They're my little brothers. I don't get in arguments with them. I know their positions. And I know where the bone is, where their armor is strong, and I know where it's weak. So I don't get into debates with them and stuff. I never had that. Right? I know in terms of fiqh, enough comparative fiqh, not extensively, but I know enough to know, oh yeah, they don't do that, or yeah, they do that, to just stay out of things.
Right.
So you avoid disputation. And if you need to speak, you speak with knowledge.
Mhm.
Because that's a responsibility when you convey knowledge. If you're talking about in the Shari'i sense, that's ilm. If you're talking about knowledge in the Kafir sense, it's education
Mhm.
and the ability to speak to people in a way in which they understand what you're saying, whether you agree or not, and you're accurate in what you're saying. Because one of the conditions, you have three conditions to a conversation: definition of terms, both parties know what they're talking about, and the terms being discussed are in context.
Right.
Without those three things, you have a debate. If you're missing any of those three things, you have a debate. Number one is defining terms. You clearly understand the defining terms. Number two, both parties know what they're talking about. And number three, the context is established. If those three things aren't there, you don't have a conversation. You either have a debate or an argument. So when you want to have a discussion with someone, like you want to talk to someone, maybe you find a subject particularly interesting or riveting, and you wanted to share some information with someone, but they disagreed and said, well, I personally don't think that this and that. Well, your ability to share with them where you both take away something from that conversation. Oh man, I learned something.
Mhm.
Right? Your ability to do that. Or someone comes to you and says, I think that the people of the Caucasus are the ancestors of the pale people today called the Caucasians, and that's where the original Europeans come from. You say to him, no, you're mistaken. The people of the Caucasus are, you are gravely mistaken.
Mhm.
You are gravely mistaken, sir. Please allow me to explain why that is. Oh, okay. Well, I thought the Caucasus people were the Caucasians. No, that's a later scientific term that was used. The actual people of the Caucasus are a Turkic people and originally shared these characteristics and are actually more closely related to these people. If you try these books, they'll actually point you in the right direction. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You
And
see, now
so,
you've had a
mhm.
conversation
Right.
rather than an argument. You've exchanged knowledge, you've exchanged information. Or a discussion I had with someone some years back, because the literature that I'd read, I thought that the Indian civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, might have been dependent upon Egypt and Sumeria. He says, I thought that too, based upon the books I had, but I found some new literature that's come out saying that actually Indian civilization developed independent of Egypt
Mhm.
and Sumer. I was like, what? When was this? He's like, yeah, go get these books. They're really good. So I found out this new information,
Mhm.
right? So we got an opportunity to share knowledge, to update information, and to take something away. He took something away, and so did I.
Mhm.
That's the part of having a conversation.
Right.
When you have a conversation, you're both listening to each other. You both know what you're talking about. It's in context, and you define terms. That's the condition.
Mhm.
Otherwise, if you're debating, and you've seen this if you go on YouTube and
Right.
you look at these debates, you ever notice, if you ever get a chance, look at when you're seeing these debates, especially when they're arguing at like Speaker's Corner in England,
Mhm. Right.
right? You'll see there'll be a person that's talking, and he's talking very quickly and very loud. The
Mhm.
second person is there, and he'll usually have his hand on his chin, or he's there. You know what you can notice though? He's not listening.
Right.
He's only waiting for his
Yes.
turn to talk.
Exactly.
He hasn't heard anything of what that other person said.
No.
And he'll always start, now, back to what I was saying. Now, wait a minute. Did you
Exactly.
hear anything of what the other person said?
Exactly.
No, because the conditions of a conversation weren't established.
Mhm.
When someone says, I want to talk to you about this thing, that means that there's going to be a conversation. So there's a listening process, question, double checking things. Now, wait a minute. By saying that, did you mean this? Right? There might be disagreements, right? Because someone says, oh, well, I think that's an interesting point, but I don't necessarily agree,
Mhm.
right? Oh, okay. Why not? Well, because I feel that these points are this, this, and this. Oh, really? Well, where's the proof for that? Well, I'd actually ran across that. You see, now you see what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
You're having a conversation, you're
Right.
exchanging ideas, right? You might not, and you might not necessarily even agree after that conversation. But the point is that you both exchanged ideas and said, you know, I had a conversation with Iskander the other day about the rise of Nazism, and he says that he believed it started from 100 years ago from Hegel. But I held the understanding that was from the time of the Reformation. But he pointed me to some really good books by Hegel and Nietzsche, and I'm going to have to go take a look at those. Right? So now you take something away. Right? You said, he gave some really interesting points. I'm going to actually go buy that 4-volume set called What Luther Says, because he said that the roots of German anti-Jewish sentiment are based in Luther. So I'm going to buy that 4-volume set called What Luther Says. I'm going to check that out for myself, see what I can get out of it. See, that's what happens in a conversation.
Yes.
That's what happens. You don't necessarily go away both agreeing, but you go away with something.
Right.
A debate is you don't go away with anything. You go away thinking, I got him. I nailed him. Or you go away, ooh, he got me. Oh, man. Okay, I got to come back harder next time. Harder with what? Well, with my stuff. I'm going to get him next time. You're going to get him doing what, though?
So these arguments mean nothing, basically, because the better you're prepared, obviously you'll win against one who's not better prepared.
That's it. And that's not an indication of the truth, because it may be that the guy that mumbles or is not a skilled debater, he might be on the truth. He's just not a good public speaker. Listen, Uthman radiallahu anhu, he's one of the 10 promised paradise. You know, he's the first one to ever forget a khutbah.
Wow.
His first khutbah, he got up in Al-Madinah. Wow. And it's in the Tariq al-Khulafa. He got up and he looked across at the crowd. He did the khutbah al-Hajjah and he looked across at the crowd and he said, you know, not everyone was made to speak in public. And we weren't made to be speakers. He said, if Allah wills, we will return next week. And he gave some basic zikr and he said, Aqimu salam and la salah.
Wow.
Right? That's the fact. Now, Uthman, we know that Uthman was on the truth. We know he was one of the 10 promised paradise. Yeah, but he wasn't a skilled public speaker. That wasn't what he liked to do. That's why he was a writer. He was a writer and a thinker. And that's why Ali, his khilafah, his 4 years, Ali spent most of his 4 years holding together what Uthman established. Ali wasn't able to build new cities and do other, he couldn't, he didn't have time because he had to deal with the Khawarij, he had to deal with other things. He was trying to hold together. That 12 years that Uthman had in khilafah was probably the most vibrant years of the whole 30 years of khilafah. Because he got so much done. Because he wasn't a big speaker. He wasn't a speaker. Right. Whereas if you look at Muawiyah, there's a diwan. Muawiyah wrote a diwan. Ali wrote those 70 lines of poetry on the creed. Omar is known for his khutbahs and his things like that. Abu Bakr is known for his righteous wa'adh and things like that. Uthman's not known for that.
Right, yes.
So just because someone might not be skilled in speaking and they get defeated in a debate, that's not proof of the soundness of your debate. Oh, the person that won the debate, he's on the truth. That's not true.
Right.
That's not true.
Because the false messiah, he will be a great debater, right?
Yes, he'll be sound in speech, and that's why the Rasul ﷺ, he said he said to beware of the munafiq with the tongue of the scholar. So there's many guys that know all these ahadith, and they might overwhelm someone who doesn't know all those ahadith. And so he'll appear knowledgeable. And other people say, ooh, he got you there. But the other person's on the truth, though. He's just not as skilled. And there's a hadith in the Sahih Imam As-Suyuti, the collection of Suyuti, where the Rasulullah said, It may be that two disputants come to me in a case, and one of them overwhelms the other because he's more eloquent. So I give the judgment in favor of him. But just know, if you're not telling the truth, I'm handing you a piece of the fire. So be careful about lying. That's the point of that statement. Both of you might come to me, and you think that by being eloquent and sharp, you overwhelm the other guy who's not, who's actually on the truth. But you think, I got away with it. The Rasulullah gave the judgment to me. No, actually, you didn't. Because even though he didn't know and Allah didn't reveal to him that you were lying, you're still going to get punished, though. That's why he said, I'm handing you a piece of fire. So that guy that wasn't as eloquent, he didn't know enough to give a good account of himself. Maybe he stuttered. Or maybe he, some people, they speak like that. And so now when you hear people do that, that doesn't give you confidence a lot of the time. But he still might be speaking the truth. Like he might get up in the khutbah, today's khutbah, it's about taqwa, and we need to, that might not make the crowd feel confident, but what if he's quoting the ayat in context, though? He might be doing everything he's supposed to do. He's just not a confident speaker.
Right.
But if someone gets up and speaks in a very swift and organized fashion, and people think, Subhanallah, it's especially Brother Iskandar, if he starts yelling. If he starts yelling and speaking with a passionate voice, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? What did he say? When he starts doing that type of stuff, people are like, Allahu Akbar.
Yes.
Because people get entertained, their hearts get moved. And they think, that's it, man. He's on the haqq. Of course, Brother Mansour is wrong. Abdul Rahman is the one that's on the truth. But it may be that Brother Mansour is the one that's on the haqq. He's just not a skilled speaker. He's not, maybe he gets embarrassed in public or he gets flustered. You know how many times I used to see when I was in university, people get up in front of the people and they had a frog in their throat where they have problems speaking.
Right.
I like to talk about, or they have to have cue cards and they're jumbling the cue cards and they drop the cue cards on the way up to give their speech and now they're out of order. You know how many times I saw that happen in university where people just fell apart? One woman just threw up and she literally is up there standing at the podium, turned and threw up in the garbage can. Now, that didn't mean that she didn't have a good report written. Exactly. She probably had a brilliant paper written. But her nervousness got the best of her. And because I have a decent command of English doesn't mean that my report was better than hers. Mine might have been terrible.
Yes, exactly.
Mine might have been disgusting. My report, it might have been nothing compared to hers. But because she got up and said, you see, you know what I mean, and stuff like that, that doesn't mean that my report was better because I don't have those verbal pauses. It just means I don't have those verbal pauses. That's all.
Yeah. And the fact that so many compounded, ignorant people are so confident does not mean anything.
No, there's plenty of people that are confident. And then there's people that are confident that they can do a lot, and they die in car accident, or they die in machinery accidents because something fell on them. Or I'll give you an example very quickly before moving on. I worked in a job doing lumber, lumberjacking with wood, and you had chainsaws. The gasoline powered chainsaws. There was an electric powered one that no one wanted to use. There was a gasoline powered one. And then you also had this massive wood chipper. And what would happen was lumber that could not be sectioned up, that had either too many knots in it, or the lumber that had dry rot or something in it, was put in the chipper and was made into bark or whatever other stuff that was done. One of the guys that was on site, there was me and another guy, and one of our foremen, we tried to tell him, because whenever you went on the plot when you went up the tree to do cuttings. So the first thing you did is you would prune and cut branches at the top and work your way down, and then finally you cut the tree either with a gas powered saw, or you'd have two people using the pull saw. And we said, aren't you going to wear your protective gear? He says, no, I don't need to.
Mm-hmm.
I've been at this job for this many years. I don't need to. And he was really confident of himself. Well, he got up. And at one point, because he was wearing a protective gear, he lost his footing. He fell into the wood chipper.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
He was destroyed instantly.
Subhanallah.
He was destroyed instantly.
Wow.
And because the way the wood chipper got, I mean, he was broken down. You've seen bark, yes?
Yeah.
It just looked like bark, but instead it was like skin and bones.
Allahu Akbar.
Now, there was CCTV footage of this happening because initially everyone on site was seen, myself and two other people were seen as possible suspects because we're the only people that were witness to it until the footage was seen. And we had to show it to the wife, and we had to show, people had to see. But that guy was confident. But that confidence didn't do him any good. Now, that's one instance where that guy was destroyed immediately. Look at the destruction that people that are confident are doing, where they just, you know what, let me just open a channel. Let me just get a mic. I've got a mic. I've got a Rode mic. Let me open my mic, take my dead cat, put it over the mic to filter out some of the background noise. I've got my camera on my computer, and now I'm going to speak on the deen.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And people just start talking, and they're absolutely positive of the things they say. That's the thing about it. They're so positive. It's what I call hubristic confidence, confidence to the point of arrogance. Because it's like, you don't even know that you don't know. You don't even know that you don't know. The ayat are clear. Are they? What do the mufassirin say? Well, I'm sure they'd say, you're sure? Or did they say it? But that's what's happened, ya.
Subhanallah.
Absolute tribulation. But these are the realities that you face, which goes back to this issue of naql and the ability to convey the intent given by the speaker or the writer accurately. Doing that and the ability to conversate properly. Defining terms, both parties know what they're talking about, and the information is in context. Those things are absolutely important in conveying knowledge right. But without that, you convey nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, you've got, if you remove that recipe, you have a debate.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing comes from debate. People often mistake light and fire for the same because you get light from both, but they're not the same. Fire and light are different. They just look the same because they both cast a shadow. But the fire burns, but light does not. And that's the distinction that has to be made. You can generate a lot of heat, but very little light with debate. You want to have a conversation. I've lost plenty of debates with Jehovah's Witnesses in my house that felt that they knew, but they went away and later came back again and said, some of what you said is weighed heavy on me. Because my goal in talking with them wasn't to win a debate, because they're already trained to debate in a way.
Right.
So why would I debate with? They're trained to debate. I'm not going to debate with them. Just like if I spar in a boxing ring with someone who's 6'7", I'm not going to come forward on them. That's what they want, so they can box from a distance. What do? I have to come in under the jab, don't I? I'm going to have to move side to side and come in under the jab and stay on his chest. I don't walk standing straight up and get knocked clean out.
SubhanAllah.
So if you know that someone specializes in debate or they're a contentious person, you don't debate. Let them do it. Your job is to look for opportunities in between them panting or breathing to ask questions. You know, it's interesting you brought that point up. Have you ever considered this? Because those things will stay with them more than the debate that you had.
Subhanallah.
Says, you know, that Iskandar guy, he has some interesting questions. Or when I tried to debate with him on this, he didn't debate. He just said, have you considered this? And now all of a sudden my debate points that I used before, they don't make any sense anymore. Because I've never had anyone ask that question like that before. Because they're used to people debating, because that's the thing. They've been programmed to debate. But when you say, you know, I've got a question about that, actually. Now it's stopped being a debate for a second. And you slowed them down. Well, what about this? Well, you see, then when they go away that night, yeah, I won the debate, but I still lost though, because they still have that sinking feeling. I'm going to look up those points Iskandar mentioned. I'm going to look that up, because which is really what you want. You want them to think and consider. What good does it do if you win a debate, but he goes away and his heart's even harder than before, because he's like, now I'm really doubling down. It's especially if you win the debate and you start humiliating him. It's like, yeah, it's like, you thought you were something, didn't you? But I got you there. He's going to go away even more resolute now, even though he lost the debate. He's going to say, no, I'm never going to give up now. But he might think he won the debate, but now he's got to go back and think, man, he asked some interesting questions. I never thought about it that way before. You have to always look at affairs like that. What are you hoping to get from speaking with that person? When I speak with people, I'm always hoping two things. I'm either hoping to learn or I'm hoping to teach. That's it. I'm not looking to debate.
Right.
Even with my children, sometimes I'll pick up some, that was interesting. Like they'll mention something, I'll be like, all right, I'll take that away. I'll keep that in the file. Or I'll ask them about something, they'll mention some point, I'll be like, that's interesting. And I'll take a little nugget away from it. That's the thing. That's how you have conversations. But you don't get ilm, that conversation. And even the ikhtilaf, the fiqh discussions that they had when they debated, what were they debating with in ikhtilaf? Knowledge. All right, this hadith, I think this hadith means that Raf al-Yadayn is abrogated. Okay, how come? Well, because of these points. All right, have you ever considered these points though? Subhanallah. Yeah, I didn't notice that. Okay, listen, this hadith here is that Rasulullah said, I saw you. He came out and saw the companions raising their hands in the salah. And he said, stop raising your hands like the tails of obstinate donkeys. You see that? That right there shows that Raf al-Yadayn is abrogated. But then Ibn Qudamah, rahimahullah, he responds and he says, well, wait a minute. The tail of a donkey flicks up and down. That's not how Raf al-Yadayn is done. So the Rasulullah from that hadith, he looks to be warning against doing Raf al-Yadayn improperly. So it's not necessarily a warning against Raf al-Yadayn itself, but a warning against doing it improperly, where you're actually flinging the hands rather than raising them in tranquility. So then the other side was like, that's an interesting point. They didn't necessarily agree. They still believe it's abrogated, but they thought about it in a different way now. Subhanallah, we never thought about it like that. That's what the ikhtilaf debate, the debates in ikhtilaf and fiqh, that's what that's about. But to have those, you have to have ilm. And both sides have to have that ilm. They have to know what they're talking about. They have to define terms. And they have to have the context. Only then can you have real ilm and have a debate. But in this sense, we're talking about an ikhtilaf debate, not jidal or munadhara. Actual ikhtilaf, which is permitted because it's knowledge-based. But people don't want to do that because the process of, looking up stuff and learning is very, very difficult. And it also involves you having to respect the other party.
Yes.
Which people are having a problem at this particular juncture. They feel they don't have to respect anybody.
Yeah, that's severely lacking today.
I don't got to respect you. I don't have to respect you. I don't owe you respect. But you have to respect me though. Wait a minute. That's one-sided. If I have to respect you, but you don't have to respect me, how do we form any type of rapport then? We don't. Okay, well, subhanallah, I guess that's the end of it. You can't run a marriage like that. You can't run a family like that. You can't run a business like that. You can't run a country like that, where it's just one-sided. Could you imagine working for a boss who says, yeah, I don't respect you. I pay you when I feel like it. Sometimes it's every 2 weeks. Sometimes it's every month. You're not going to work. Listen, you might work there for a month because you're looking for somewhere else because you're going to put in notice. That's the only reason you're staying for a month. All right, Brother Abu Jafar, I'm going to work here for like a month. I'm going to put in my 2 weeks notice though. Because I'm not going to stay here where sometimes I get paid every 2 weeks and sometimes it's a month. I need something where I'm respected by my employer. And that's part of the conditions in the conversation, because by knowing the context, both of you knowing what you're talking about, and by defining terms, the context, and both of you know what you're talking about, by doing those three things, it engenders mutual respect. Because you can respect their discussions and you can respect their points. I know there'll come a point, like I can discuss with a Christian. And we'll reach a certain point where it's insoluble. Like for example, the Coptic Christian years ago I was talking with, I said, do you affirm that Allah is al-Wahid? And he said, no. Because al-Wahid in Arabic means that Allah is one in his attributes, in his names, and in his essence. No Christian worth his salt that knows Christianity is going to say Allah is Wahid in his essence. Because that means there's no plurality in his that. That's the very gist of the Trinity, that there's plurality in his essence. He can't affirm that. He said, if I do that, I become you. I was like, exactly. Wow. That's what I'm trying to get you to do. That's what I'm trying to get you to do. That's why we were sitting here for the past 2.5 hours, and we're trying to get you to believe in al-Wahid. But you can never reach that point if you never define terms and have context and both know what you're talking about. You can never reach that point if I'm just looking to debate him and I showed him. You showed him what though? So then he goes from the conversation thinking, well, I might be wrong, but I don't want to be a Muslim because look at how arrogant they are. So you still lost it in the end.
Exactly.
Because his heart's hardened. And only Allah knows when he'll be guided or when he is and when he won't be. We don't know. But the point is, you won't get any reward for his guidance because you became an instrument for him to have an excuse. Say, yeah, he's the excuse. Abu Jafar is the excuse that I don't become Muslim. Because look at how he is. He's the reason I don't want to be a Muslim. You don't want to be that person. So you have to avoid that type of debate and stuff. And even in fiqh ikhtilaf, even that has to be held with a certain level of decorum. Like it was had on certain days. Like if you look at, like when we mentioned his life, like those debate and discussions, notice that they were had after Asr. Why? Because it's the cool part of the day. People are calm. They've had something to eat. If you have those discussions and early, people are hot, their energy is up, that's where you're probably going to get people more likely to yell and holler. Because their energy is up and they're angry. It's the hottest part of the day, so people are irritable. It's after Asr.
And that's exactly when they're outside debating in those street corners.
Yes. Whereas after Asr, he's calm. He's probably just wrapped up the last of his work day. He might have had something to eat. He's probably drinking something. He's probably quenched his thirst with something. Now he's sitting down. He's actually listening. And he's less likely to get heated And then the discussion between Maghrib and Isha, again, it's now you're only a few hours before going to bed. Who wants to be angry before you go to bed? No one. So obviously the discussion will be, the shape and size of the discussion will be different. It will be different. That is taqwa.
SubhanAllah. So, Jazakallah khairan for this information, Sheikh.
Yeah.
And then, inshallah, we shall proceed with the written legacy of the Imam, inshallah, in the upcoming parts.
Inshallah.
So, I say, Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika, wa ashhadu la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.